Hello and welcome to Kegbat's YouTube channel. I'm going to be making a summer beer recipe. It's May, the weather's getting really nice, and there's nothing nicer than sitting outside with a couple of refreshing beers to drink in the hot weather. The weather's been really good recently, and I want to try and get this beer done quickly before the weather turns bad, as the British summer can be, temperamental. So the beer that I'm making today is kind of a cross between an American IPA, an American wheat, and a traditional Belgian wheat. So the recipe, which I'll put down below, is 50% wheat malt, 50% pale malt. There's 100 grams of Calypso hops, and it's fermented with sap ale WBO6. This is a pretty simple recipe to make. Most of the flavour is going to come from the Calypso hops, and I'm really into Calypso hops. I feel like they don't get as much love as they deserve. They're kind of in line with more of like the classic C-type hops. They were very citrusy, but they've also got some other flavours in there. They've got like apple and pear and a bit of earthy flavour. They're quite complex, and they work really well in sour beers, and they work really well in saisons and wheat beers. With this recipe, it lends itself well to sort of subbing out some of the ingredients. So I've used saison yeast before, I've used Kvike yeast before, and I've used different types of wheat beer yeasts, and it's always come out like a nice refreshing beer. You can even try using, say, something like USO5 or WLP 001, some kind of like clean ale yeast. And with the hops, I've also substituted them for Equinox and Ella, and the sort of softer but juicier Pacific style hops. Calypso, it is an American hop. I would strongly recommend you try it with Calypso first, because I think this has been my favourite iteration of the beer. I'll also put a link so you can buy the recipe pack already made with the malt already milled, so all you have to do is just put it into your system. Right, so let's get brewing. I'm filling my kettle with 39 litres of water. That's going to be both the mash and the sparge water. It's going to be a bit different depending on what system you have, and that includes 16 litres of mash water and 23 litres of sparge water. We're going to mash in at 65 degrees for 90 minutes. I prefer to do a 90-minute mash. I find they get higher efficiency. And then we're going to mash out at 75 degrees for 10 minutes. The reason to do a mash out is because it stops any more activity happening in the mash tun. And then we're going to sparge at 77 degrees. I have a home system, so I use my Wort Chiller to recirculate the wort through the sparge water in the kettle to keep it at temperature. Okay, now the water's at temperature, I'm mashing in. Getting the air out the pump using my bleeder valve. I'm mashing in the grains and I'm stirring as I do that. And that avoids dough balls. So I'm avoiding dough balls, and it looks like I'm doing quite a good job. Mash is all nicely stirred in. I'm putting this top plate on. The reason for that is when the beer recirculates, it doesn't disturb the grain bed. So I recirculate the mash, and a lot of all-in-one systems like the Grain Father will do the same thing. So the wort comes out of the tap, goes into this pump here. This thing is called a bleeder valve, and it then goes into the heat exchange. So what's going on is that I've got my sparge water at temperature there in the kettle, and it's keeping the mash water at temperature, and then it gets returned onto the top of the mash tun. So this is doing quite a few things. It's stirring the wort would be sitting, there'll be hot pockets, there'll be cold pockets, and this is keeping it sort of homogenized. Recirculation also helps clear the wort. As the wort comes out the bottom of the mash tun, it pulls with it loads of small grains and bits of malt. And as it gets returned on top, it creates its own grain bed, and that creates a filter to filter out all the little bits of malt, and so you get a much clearer wort. And it also helps keep it at temperature. Okay, we're just on the mash out, and you can see, maybe you can see there, the wort is very clear. Okay, I'm just doing the sparge at the moment, and the way that I do my sparge on a 2-vessel system like this is drain the wort into a bucket very slowly and measure how much wort I collect. So this is going to be a 25 litre batch, so I'm looking to get 30 litres of wort because on my system I have a 5 litre boil-off rate. I pump hot liquor from the kettle through my system, and what it's also doing is, like, by pumping it through my Wort Chiller, is that I'm cleaning out any wort which is left in there, any sugars, and yeah, it also just helps clean it so it doesn't get all like gunky inside. So this is known as fly sparging, and when you do this kind of sparging, the idea is to do it quite slowly, so you're going to pull the remaining sugars out of the malts, and the rate of water going in should match the rate of water coming out. So the first bucket has now got 15 litres of wort in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap it over with the next bucket, because carrying 15 litres of liquid at a time is an awful lot easier than carrying 30 litres of liquid. It also means I can get the wort heating up, and it just saves some time on the boil. Okay, bucket number 2 has now got up to 15 litres. So we're going to pour it into the kettle to boil. And before I forget, let's take a pre-boil gravity reading. Is 1042. See that is. Whilst the kettle reaches the boil, I'm going to measure out the bittering addition. It's a single hop beer, so we're using Calypso throughout. Calypso is also a very good bittering hop, as well as a good flavour hop, so it's known as a dual hop. We don't want too much bitterness in this beer, because when a beer is too bitter, it stops becoming refreshing and can be a bit difficult to drink, and we want this to be a nice, refreshing, easy drinking beer. So we're only putting 10 grams of Calypso in for the bittering addition. That's my timer telling me that we're at the boil, so let's put in the first lot of hops. Okay, the next hops go in at 15 minutes, and I need 15 grams. They smell so good. Nice and tropical. It gets kind of steamy in the brewery. I brew in the basement, and if I step outside, I get some of this lovely sunshine. I've got a new pack of yeast. I'm about halfway through the boil, and I'm going to rehydrate the yeast. And I'd recommend doing that, because when you just sprinkle the yeast straight from the sachet into the wort, what happens is yeast gets a bit of a shock when it wakes up with all this food around it, and it just sort of, a lot of their cells just die. And when you rehydrate it, it wakes up more gently, and then you pitch that slurry and you have a healthier yeast and you get a healthier fermentation. I know that there's been some debates online about whether you still need to do this or not. The manufacturer's guidelines still recommend you do that. In my experience, whenever I don't rehydrate the yeast, my beers take a lot longer to ferment and they're just not as good. So I would recommend doing that, but if it's a bit different for you, then you do what works for you. Okay, we've got to the 15-minute mark. It's in 15 minutes left. So I'm going to put in the next hop charge. I'm going to put in a pinch of Protaflock, quite a large pinch. And I'm going to put in my immersion chiller. If I put it in at the 15-minute mark, it gets nice and sterilised. Okay, we're at the 5-minute mark, so we'll put the next lot of hops in. And the last charge of hops, which goes in at flame out, which is 20 grams again. Okay, we've got to flame out, So I'm going to turn off the boil, going to add in the plain art addition of the hops, and I'm going to get water going through the immersion chiller. Cool. Now that the beer has cooled down to its temperature, we can put it into the fermenter. I'm going to start off with the demijohn. I'm just going to take about 4 litres, and I'm actually going to ferment this. I think I originally said with some Kveik yeast, but I've got some WLP 060, which would be good to use to grow up again, because I'm going to use it in a bigger batch. And that's another reason why it's useful to have these offshoots from the main batch. So I'm letting the wort fall from a bit of a height because that's going to oxygenate the beer, and this is the only time you want oxygen in the beer, really. Turn that off. Don't want this to splash. Yep, I've got the tap closed. Always a good start. So yeah, they're splashing around nicely. The oxygen basically helps the yeast. It's finished draining, and so I'm just going to click the lid on. Oh, I'm going to take a gravity reading, and that's about it. And it's at about 1049. So it's just below the 1050 line, so I'd make that 1049. The target gravity was 1046, so I guess my efficiency is higher than I thought it was. I'm going to put the beer in my fermentation chamber and set it to 24 degrees. Actually, I forgot to pitch the yeast. So the last bit, that little yeast slurry we made. There we go, yeast is in. Okay, with this beer I just need to pitch in the WLP 060 slurry. I'm going to pour about half this slurry in and put the rest back on there. So yeah, that's about it for the brew day. I've just got to go and clean up now, which will be another 5 hours or so. I'm going to dump all the trub, all the spent grain. I've got some chickens, they love it. So I'm going to go give that to them. I'm going to just do some cleaning up in here. And then I'll see you next when I sample the beer. It's been a week since brew day, and the beer has almost finished fermenting. It's about 83% attenuated. I think at most I'll probably get another couple of percent or so, but now's a good time to dry hops. So I'm just gonna put in the remainder of the bag of hops. So this recipe is based around using 100 grams of Calypso. The bag comes in 100 grams, so I've used the rest in the boil, and now the remainder is just what I'm gonna chuck in now. Making sure it's all nice and sanitized. Oh, it smells great. In go the hops. Beer finished fermenting. I added the dry hops, and now the beer has been kegged, and it's been sitting in the keg for a while, and it's nice and carbonated. I wish I could be doing this outside, this lovely summer ale, but the British summer, man. It's like grey and gloomy out there. So anyway, I've got this here. This is the summer ale. The actual official name I've given it is White Harvest. Long story behind the name, and it's not that interesting, but as you can see, it's very, very cloudy. It looks like a NEPA almost, but it's a wheat cross with an IPA. The aroma is like really fruity, like tropical fruits. It's got that, you know, typical juicy sort of aroma. You know, I'm getting like passion fruit and like mango and guava. It's really, really very pleasant. Oh, this is delicious. It's those tropical fruits definitely come through. It's also quite like earthy. It's got kind of like a bitterness and like a spice to it as well. And the wheat yeast is definitely coming through too. It's very almost Belgian phenolics coming through, and it really works well with the Calypso hops. So yeah, this is like really nice. This is really easy going. The mouthfeel as well is very it's probably like a medium mouthfeel, so it's not thick, but it's not thin either. It's just very drinkable, very manageable. Oh, that's a really good beer. I'm going to enjoy this, and I'd really recommend that you enjoy it too. There's a link down below for the recipe kit. If you've enjoyed this video, please let us know, leave a comment, let us know how you get on brewing this beer, or if you've done any variations. I'd really like to know how you change things up a bit, you know, how you made it your own, of course. That's what home brewing's all about. If you've enjoyed this, please like, please subscribe, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.